everybody. We are back. It's been a little bit. It's our regular in air quotes, Wednesday night discussion on the Cosmic Doctrine, Dion Fortune's Cosmic Doctrine. Thank you for joining us or checking this out after the fact. Tonight we will be in Greer's book and Dion Fortune's book. But we're at Greer, we're on chapter 12, which is the beginning of the mind. So the solar system, or the system that Dion Fortune has been building up for us, begins to have a mind in place. And we're going to explore what that means. And for those of you who have never tuned in before, if this is your first time, we are going through a book called The Cosmic Doctrine. David, can you show that book again for me, please? The Cosmic Doctrine is a cornerstone piece of occult/esoteric literature from the early to mid 20th century by author Dion Fortune, who was a Christian mystic and Kabbalist, and was trained by remnants of the Golden Dawn Order. And this book is a dense read, it's a difficult read, and its purpose is to train how your mind thinks, or how we approach things in general. So it's not one of those books we read from beginning to end and just go on with our lives. It's more of a thing where you read, and then after you're done reading it, a chapter, you meditate on it for a month or whatever. So that's kind of the type of book this is. Very dense. And we're about halfway through this right now. So it's been an interesting journey. My brother David Morgan here is going to be the primary speaker, and we're going to move into the beginnings of the mind. So with that, David, take us into the mind.
So officially in this textbook, I think we're chapter 13. In the other one, it's 12 in the other version.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's interesting for me in this particular chapter, because I feel like the last chapter, there's a lot of really good like epiphanies, kind of metaphors and relations to things. And then this particular chapter gets really dense again. And I know that John Michael Greer feels that that's probably on purpose. You got to remember back when all this stuff was being written, there was a lot of there's a lot of work that was either hidden or like Dion Fortune's group, she wanted them to work through it on their own. But a lot of that stuff is not the sort of textbook course that she would put her students through is not the standard of today's education, right? So a lot of people don't necessarily have the background that you would need to understand some of that stuff. And so that's where John Michael Greer's commentary comes in handy, because he starts to lay it out for you. And so, yes, as John Michael Greer says, in Dion Fortune's time, which wasn't really that long ago, I mean, 100 years or so, less than that. There were things that were kept secret in her time, and now they're all over the internet. And so it's it's important to be able to point out what is right and what is wrong. And so in this particular chapter, we start talking about the beginnings of mind, both from a macro and sort of a micro cosm viewpoint here. So Fortune starts out by drawing a distinction between two objects, and those are the tracks in space left by the movements of objects, and then the objects themselves. And so if you remember some of the beginning metaphors we were talking about, that movement, consciousness is movement. And so when you start talking about these tracks in space, what she's really referring to is patterns of action, patterns of thought, and they lay down these tracks that then are easy for because I always sort of envision it like a snowbank, right? That the first one out there is out there, moving the snow out of the way to actually make the track. And then the more people that work on it, the more stable that track becomes, the easier it is for the next person who's coming through to walk that same track. They don't have to do all the trailblazing that the initial uh, entity or person or whatever had to do necessarily.
You can also think of it like an album. When you place a needle down on an album and it's in those tracks, and the track's already established at that point. So your allegory is great for the beginnings, and then the records towards the end. Now you're fitted into that groove, and it's making music that someone else had already created.
Yeah, and to sort of tie this back to, and we'll be doing this a number of times as we sort of talk through it here, but to tie it back in, it's why things like we're talking about Masonic lodges, why the ritual is the same all the time. Like there are tracks in space that make it easier for people to pick up the information, to perform the ritual part of it. And this is seen not just in Freemasonry, but even stuff like AA, where there's a set way to do things, and if you do it, you'll gain the success of the people who walked it before you. So when Dion Fortune starts thinking about these tracks in space left by the movement of objects, so an object moves and then comes to rest, but the track in space is left by the movement that keeps on flowing. So even if the object moves on to the next track in space, right, that the movement that created that initial track is still there, right? And so that's what we're talking about, where it's possible for other objects then to come and interact with that track. That movement does not stop. It continues ad infinitum. And so these two things then, the concrete objects themselves and the abstract movements of space, form the two halves of the universe that we experience. And what she refers to as the atoms, which is us, the spark. So atoms in motion form the half that we call matter, substance, manifestation. And the pure movement part, the pure movement apart from the atoms and other objects, is what we refer to as the spirit, the mind, the consciousness. And so this is sort of where the first, I wouldn't say secret or trap necessarily occurs. But Fortune explains that, in the earlier parts of the book, that atoms are themselves pure movement. All that is in the universe is movement. And so, movement in space is all that there is. And thus the distinction between objects and tracks in space is more apparent than real. Objects are tracks in space that through repetition have settled into their stable condition. And if you remember back when we were talking about the creation of the universe, right, that all this creation happens and all this movement goes throwing everything around, but eventually everything starts to settle into a pattern. And that's the stable condition that she's talking about here. And then the tracks in space that still look like pure movement apart from these objects are those that haven't yet gone through all of their changes, right? They're still learning. They're still making new tracks in space. They're still growing, right? They haven't reached that stagnation, right? They're not just settled into an orbit. They're still processing what's going on. And so one of the important implications in that is that what is spirit and mind and consciousness today, if it sustains itself over time, becomes matter, substance, and manifestation tomorrow.
Which, if you take a step back and apply that to anything in life, so there was that book, it was a book called The Secret. Remember, it came out in like the 1990s or something. and it was the secret of all life, and it really is, and it's Hermeticism, which was amazing. And even I was like 21 or whatever when that book came out, and I remember reading that and going, well, this is exactly the same as the Golden Dawn book I was reading, only it was just worded for general people. But when you look at that, what you just said, what is spirit, mind, and conscious today sustains itself over time, becomes matter, substance, and manifestation tomorrow. That's also training your mind to go, through discipline, like go to the gym every day or eat the right ways or study every day, starts to build the reality tomorrow. That if you have that discipline to continue down that track, you're making what you want to manifest itself. And that's not magical. It's not like I'm not waving a wand and it just happens. But in a way, it is magical because that's how you train your mind. If you want something, you have to put in that repetition in those tracks. And those tracks in space may not exist yet. You may have to lay those tracks in space down. But once you get into a habit, it's really hard to get out of that habit, for good or bad, good habits or bad habits.
Right. Yeah, this equally applies to bad habits as well. Um, and one of the other things we sort of touched on a little bit earlier, we explored this point also in talking about the what Dion Fortune and John Michael Greer referred to as the individuality, which is the part of yourself that endures from life to life, beyond death, and then the personality that's evolved in each life, right? And we talked about the personality is sort of the suit that you put on, right? The mask, that is the you today, but the real you is not what you see here. It exists, beyond what you see. Your
With these
true
eyes,
self.
with these eyes,
Right.
it's beyond what you see with these eyes, and that's actually the goal of everything we're doing here is to contact who we really are.
Yeah, and so and these are just some of the points, right? And so the purpose that Dion Fortune's trying to get here is that this point applies more generally. It applies to everything, really. And so with that point made, Fortune then turns to the narrative of the solar system's development that she's been tracing out since chapter 7 or so. So on the cosmic side of things, we have the solar logos, which she equates to as being the god of this solar system. And so once a traveling atom moving through the cosmos, that's what it once was, and now it's the center of the solar system. And we have the cosmic atoms that were swept up with the solar logos on its journey, and now they circle the logos. And from this point on, references to the cosmic atoms will be relatively sparse in the text. He starts talking about the sparks of individuality and more of the soul and stuff. So we kind of leave that metaphor behind here going forward.
And it gets really interesting. This is where I couldn't stop reading, and I ended up plowing through the rest of the book right away. I remember I came to Lodge like, oh, it's gotten really good, and I told you that. Dave is the one that turned me onto this book. So
yeah, we've got for me. I mean, it's interesting, but we've got to. I feel like we got to. For me, I think it was really the when we start talking about the Lords of Flame, Form, and Mind that really for me what made me like not be able to put it down. We got a couple more chapters to go before there, but we're not very far from that. Um, and so back to the cosmos here. Um, this is because we have passed from the cosmos to the solar system. So in effect, the dream that the solar logos dreams as it orbits a central stillness, and that dream, that movement of the solar logos is our reality. Um, and though each of us has a cosmic atom at the core of our being, we don't wake from the dream until we have passed through the entire cycle of our evolution, until we have gone through all the planes and then back up and reconnected with the divine plane. Um, and so until then, we are subject to the dream of the solar logos, to the dream of God, which is the reality that we experience.
that is another baseline of esoteric principles, that we exist in a dream, and that dream is being done by God, and by God dreaming and thinking about this plane, we exist. And that when we meditate, we are joining in communion not only with God and his dream, but with everyone else who's also meditating, which is a Rosicrucian principle.
Obviously, within this dream, the phenomena of the solar system takes the center stage, right? Those consist first of the tracks in space laid down by the uncoordinated movements of the cosmic atoms, which, since repeated movement ends up becoming a manifested reality, become in their own right, and the raw material out of which the solar system takes shape. And then, second, we have the tracks in space laid down by the dance of the solar logos, which then reflect the experience of the cosmos and draw the atoms of the solar system into their patterns. This is where, we've said many times, as above, so below, right? So the experience that the solar logos had traveling around the central stillness, the 12 rays, the seven planes, right? That gets mirrored to a certain extent in the dream of the solar logos, because that's its sort of subconscious. Um, it's, as I said, it's a dream. It has all those patterns of thought have been imprinted on it, and so it just sort of naturally flows out uh, into the solar system that we experience, and that's why we are also subject, right, to the 12 planes, and we view that as the zodiac, the seven planes of existence, and uh, many of that stuff as well. So those are all the ingredients of the solar system. Now, because the consciousness of the solar system has been oh, I just talked about that. Okay. So yeah, now we're looking at the creation of the cosmos on a smaller scale, and this will again continue as we continue reading here. We're going to see it. We each have our own personal 12 rays and seven planes, and it again, as above, so below. You're gonna hear that a lot.
Maya's got her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet. I've been listening to it as an audiobook, but I like recently heard something that talks about how like our lives and our patterns are dictated by our birth dates and like the zodiacs and the different houses of the zodiac, and how you are kind of like on the path dictated by the zodiacs until you pass through the different 12 houses of those zodiacs and break free of that karmic chain, and are free to like kind of then start laying your own path. Um, and that's interesting because it's like exactly what he said, but in different terms.
Yep.
you're gonna see a lot of that in here. I mean, obviously, Dion Fortune was very heavily influenced by the Golden Dawn, which was influenced by a whole bunch of different things that pop up repeatedly uh, throughout a lot of the esoteric work. So you're gonna see a lot of that theme in there. Uh, and I don't remember where I read it, but I know that uh, at least on some of the belief of reincarnation is that you must have at least 12 lives, because you need to be born under each zodiac sign so that you can experience what those influences are and how they affect your lives as you go through them.
Astrology is another one of those topics that one should get familiar with, and not the hippie horoscope type stuff either. I mean, and that's the hard part, is finding actual good courses on true astrology. So, for those of you in the Discord, I did post a link to one that I know. It's one of the guys in Phoenix. He does lectures. He was just in Egypt a couple months ago. He's part of the he's in one of the Masonic lodges. He's actually part of the research lodge as well. So as I get more, I'll post information there.
I wonder if there's a way to take it like one step deeper and not just look at it as in terms of like reincarnating and like your whole like life as like a new like being, as a new soul, or a soul reincarnated in a different body. But I wonder if you looked at it in terms of like these the different planets that rule the different days of the weeks, and being able to like be in sync with those frequencies and passing through those different energies. And essentially I wonder if you could do so like through a full week, like the full 7 day calendar, and go through those different energies and be like kind of break free. Do you fully dedicate yourself to that?
But there's certainly there's certainly ways to do some of that. What's the old saying? The stars incline, they don't define, or so, I forget what the exact phrase is. Um, but and basically what that means is that your fate's not written in the stars, right? The stars will sort of show you uh, where you'll have difficulties in life, where uh, your strengths and weaknesses are, but they don't necessarily uh, uh, you know define your destiny, right? You can still write your own destiny with what you read in the stars. Um, Now, one thing I will state for just from the astrology perspective is you'll definitely want to know what your natal chart is. There's a number of websites out there that you can just plug in the date, time you were born, and where, and it'll figure it all out for you. Um, and then you can see what areas you are are weak in and where you're strong in. And I know one of the things that um, is recommended is that if you have a particular uh, we're probably going way off topic here on astrology, but so one of the things is that if you're have a particularly debilitated planet or a particularly debilitated sign, um, you can do things like astrological what's a term I'm thinking of, not charity, but uh come to me, something like astrological charity, um where you can sort of try to help mitigate those negatives. um but it's not recommended that, if for example your Saturn is in a really bad spot in your star chart. It's not recommended that you can say hymns to Saturn. You can do you know donate time and charity and stuff to Saturn to try and mitigate some of that, but you don't want to try to do like a Saturn working where you're actually working with the planet, because that's uh that's the challenges that you're going to face in this life, and it's there for a reason. And You want to find where you're stronger if you're wanting to do more astrological working. So that's just something to keep in mind um, when you're dealing with the astrological aspect of it. All right, so back to the cosmic doctrine here. Um, as we sort of said before, right? The You got to remember the solar logos is still part of the cosmos, right? It didn't suddenly separate itself from the cosmic stillness. It's still constantly being influenced uh, by everything else that's radiating from the central stillness, the rays, the other great entities that are orbiting on closer tracks to the central stillness. Um, and so, uh, those things that are even outside of uh there are things outside of the solo logos purview that can still impact things within the dream of our reality. um and so the logos moves in its intricate dance one after another. The move of the dance lay down those tracks in space. Through repetition, the tracks become enduring currents of space, and then begin to influence the movements of other objects that are in there in turn, right? I always imagine like pinball, right? That you just start hit the you as the cosmic atom, like it's like a pinball machine with like billions of pinballs in it, just bouncing all over the place, interacting with each other. um, and so all those movements, right, get mirrored into the reality that we experience. uh, and then here is where the objects that matter the most at this stage are the secondary atoms. because a lot of those bigger atoms are starting to settle into their movements, right? It's those repeated movements in the solar system that are starting to settle, but we still, we ourselves are still, one of those atoms that is bouncing all over the place in motion. Um, and so, as in the cosmos, so in the solar system, and some atoms are more complex than others, and so they sort themselves exactly like they did when dealing with the central stillness into the different concentric rings. Um, Now, one thing that Michael Greer points out here is that uh, talking about the planes. So, in the Rosicrucian occult philosophy that provides most of the subtext for the cosmic doctrine, there are 7 great cosmic planes, 6 of which are completely outside of our knowledge and understanding. Everything we are capable of knowing about exists only on the 7th plane, cosmic plane. And that 7th cosmic plane is divided into 7 other planes, which are the planes which our spiritual evolution takes place on. And then each of these 7 planes is divided into 7 subplanes. For example, the physical plane is divided into the solid region, the liquid region, the gaseous region, and then 4 etheric regions, which are the chemical ether, the life ether, the light ether, and the reflecting ether. Um, that's just one of the, obviously, all the etheric plane, the astral plane. They all have all these 7 plane breakdowns as well. And I think you can even get further into. I mean, I think you keep just down, and like each subplane will also have 7 subplanes, and depending on how complex you wanna dig down into it there. Um, and this sort of this is one of the things that uh, during Dion Fortune's times, like all of her students knew all this information because they were learning Rosicrucian stuff, but it's not something that's inherently pointed out in the cosmic doctrine. And so that's one of those things that that sort of needs to be pointed out, especially as we go further on and we start talking about uh, the movement through the planes down and then back up, um, because all that information was sort of just uh, it was part of the curriculum back in Dion Fortune's time, and it's not something that if you just picked up this book you're necessarily going to know without having done that those studies before. Uh, and then there's also an interesting reversal here between the cosmos and the solar system that needs to be kept in mind as well. And that's that in the cosmos, the 7th cosmic plane, where the most complex cosmic atoms settle out, is the plane furthest from the central sun, right? So when we're talking about the central stillness, right? We had the 7 concentric planes. Our solar system is on the 7th, which is furthest from the central stillness. But in the solar system, by contrast, the 7th plane is the one nearest to the center and closest to the logos. So this is one of the ways that a solar system is sort of a cosmos that is turned inside out. Um, and this is crucial here because not all the atoms of the solar system settle into the 7 planes. Some are too complex and become traveling atoms, similar to the traveling atoms of the cosmos, but on a smaller scale, right? On the solar system scale. And the traveling atoms, like their cosmic equivalents, have a more complex destiny than their simpler cousins. And they are imprinted by the solar logos consciousness. And since this has been conditioned by the cosmos, the traveling atoms of the solar system receive uh, at second hand that same cosmic imprint, right? So again, as above, so below. And then in Dion Fortune's metaphor, it's expressed in terms of motion, right? Again, we are just talking about motion in the beginning. We're going to keep coming back to this metaphor of motion. So you have great numbers of secondary atoms that are too complex to settle out into any of the 7 planes, and each of these dance in the rhythms of the solar logos. The dance, as it repeats itself, becomes a track in space, echoing the thoughts of the logos, and so these traveling atoms become twofold entities: a complex atom with a track in space laid down by its attunement with the logos, which governs the motion of the atom. But since that track in space is pure motion, it is of the same nature as the motions of the logos and can interact in some sense with the with the solo logosness. Since it's been shaped by the motions of the solo logos consciousness, it contains in sort of early stage embryonic form all of the possibilities for reaction that the logos itself evolved during its time as a traveling atom. So the secondary atoms that settle into place in the seventh plane have that same potential. But since they don't come in direct contact with the logos, the potential remains unfulfilled for the time being. And in the traveling atoms, that potential becomes a reality. In this way, as already noted, God makes man in his image and likeness. Right? The potentials of God are the potentials of man.
And the interesting thing about the image of man and being like God does not mean that we physically look like God.
Right.
It means that we are composed like God. We are a miniature version of God.
So we have these secondary traveling atoms. Each one is a set of movements that has become sort of stereotyped through its repetition and now acts like an object. Each one also picks up a new set of movements absorbed from the dance of the solo logos, which gives it a new set of possibilities for reaction and memory. And which if you recall from earlier in the book, that is Fortune's definition of consciousness, right? The possibilities for reaction and memory. And then finally, each of these atoms begins to attract other atoms into its dance. These latter are not traveling atoms, but ordinary stay-at-home atoms of the seventh plane form a body, the seventh plane body of a new kind of entity. You might be able to see where we're going with this here. The original traveling atom, Dion Fortune calls it the seed atom, and she calls it the beginnings of a vehicle. Now, uh, in the occult terminology of her day, vehicle is just another word for body, uh, and it's overshadowed by the track in space that guides its motions and those of its seventh plane body. So as we'll see, then this track in space has a special destiny. If the seventh plane atoms attracted by the seed atom are the first foreshadowings of a body, the track in space is the first foreshadowings of a spirit, of a soul. And the composite being made up of these three things is an entity of evolution, of learning, of change. That's us, right? Uh, so now each such entity is a reflection within the solar system of a cosmic atom, which is the spiritual essence of that entity. And so uh, while Dion Fortune isn't going to talk about the cosmic atoms anymore, it's still a concept that shouldn't be forgotten here, because the cosmic atom was there before the solar system was born and will be there after it has dissolved. Right? It enters into manifestation in the solar system for an entire evolution, the way a soul enters a body for a single incarnation. And then the composite form made up of a seed atom, a track in space, and a seventh plane body is the most basic form of its embodiment, which is the form you had at the beginning of your own journey through of manifestation. And that's going to be a key theme as we continue forward here, because in the beginning we're sort of talking about things in a very abstract way. Now we're talking about things that are happening to us, right? It's not abstract anymore. This is, we're starting to get into the actual evolution of man and his soul and what our purpose is. And that's sort of the 13th chapter.
The beginning of the mind, it starts to gain consciousness. Right now it's still sleeping. We will be evolving the divine sparks or the celestial sparks in the next chapter, I believe. And those will start to form planetary spirits, planetary bodies, which starts to tie into the whole concept of the daimon, or Daimon, it's a Greek word, where each planet has its own spirit. And again, it goes back to astrology, having its energy, and also in theurgy, where you want to work with the planetary spirits to accomplish things, which is where the Seal of Solomon comes into play. And the Seal of Solomon, if you're into Freemasonry, well, we have the unfinished Seal of Solomon as our primary insignia. So take from that what you will.
That's one of the things I feel like I really like about the cosmic doctrine in particular, is that it ties, I feel like it ties into everything esoteric stuff.
Oh, for sure.
You read about Kabbalah, you read about astrology, you read about this or that, and like you can all trace something back to what Dion Fortune's talking about in the cosmic doctrine.
Yep, I'm doing a class on astrology, and he actually was showing an alternate view of the tree of life. And the alternate view of the tree of life is there's spheres, which is astrology basically, but you pass through the different spheres, and that all reminded me of the cosmic doctrine, because it looked like not really like a solar system, but it was a concentric ring that was building itself out. Everything ties into itself. We just all in here use maybe different language to talk about the same basic concepts. And sometimes you can get hung up on that too, like the language, just you're speaking the same thing, but you're just saying it in different ways.
Yeah, it kind of that, your comment there just goes back to the topic we had last week about dogma, right? Don't get too caught up in the dogma of, they said this is the way, and so that's got to be the right way. There are many paths up that mountain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many paths up the mountain, and several mountains, right? Was that you who said that? Someone said that. Maybe
that's Greer's metaphor, is that people always say, well, there's many paths on the mountain. He's like, well, actually, there's a whole bunch of different mountains too. It's a mountain range. It's not just one.
Right.
You'll get the view regardless of which mountain you climb and which path you take.
Yep.
But there's a lot of different paths.
Yep. Does anyone have any comments or anything they want to share? Everybody's quiet tonight. All right. Well, I will go ahead and wrap up the stream then, and we can stick around and general chit chat. Thank you guys for tuning in. Our next one of these, well, we're in the holiday season, so I know next week a bunch of us will not be available because we will be doing something else in another group, another order. And the week after that's Christmas. Probably won't be meeting for Christmas. Can't say we'll be meeting for New Year's. I'm not sure, but I doubt it. Those are usually family days, so might be another month before we get together. Gives everyone a whole month. Maybe on the 8th we get together, or whenever that Wednesday is, to catch up if you need to catch up. And we'll be in it's chapter 13 in Greer's book, and chapter 13 in the Millennial Edition. The seed atom building a seventh plane body. The evolution of the divine sparks is what we'll be discussing next. All right. Take care.